Thank you for the invite and giving us the chance to present our approaches of game-based learning and gamification, and also to present the games we developed. So roughly a year ago, we formed a new sort of area or part of KIgA called KIgA Games. And in this sort of area of work, we develop games for civic democratic education, and especially games that address topics of a migration society. Here it's very important to understand that we are not just doing this for quote-unquote migrants. We understand a migration society as an inclusive concept which incorporates every person in a society. And Germany is a migration society. We've been historically very much influenced by people coming to Germany, people leaving Germany. So we understand this as a very important part of our work, to see the society as that and also deal with the challenges and chances of such a migration society. And I'm sure a lot of you guys live in countries which are in that regard very similar to Germany, and the discourse might be similar in some regards. So what we want to do in our games is to sort of do a perspective shift and give space for narratives which are often neglected, which are maybe people or pupils or students or young adults, young kids who have the feeling maybe, oh, my voice is the voices of my families, the stories of my families. They really don't have a say in sort of the dominant society view. So that's why we try to foster or try to bring up those stories and give them a chance to be told and to be seen. So that's something very important we try to do in our games. And what we set out to do with our games initially, which was very important for us, is to see those games as tools which work both in formal education settings, meaning schools, but also non-formal educational settings, meaning whatever workshops with multipliers, and as well, and that's sort of the third base we put those games on, is those games should be fun and work at home as well. So this is some sort of a challenge, because you work for different target groups and different settings when we see those three settings, but we're quite confident that we managed to make games which work in formal, non-formal settings and at home. And so that is sort of the base we started with the imprint, what we wanted to achieve with KIgA Games. How did it come about? We did an exhibition called Toleranzräume in the last, when was it, 2 years ago, and it was a traveling exhibition, and the approach was to talk about topics like tolerance and coexistence in a diverse society. And the challenge here was, since it was a very small space, we had to give people the chance to grasp those big topics very easily and very quick. So one of the main pieces we put into this exhibition was a hidden object picture, which was 4 meters big. So in case you know Where's Waldo, that is something we did as well, but for a city. And we put into this city's pictures of how do we live in a tolerant society together, where are challenges, where are maybe problems. And to make it even more immersive, we built into this 4 meter picture games. So you open doors in this picture, and then maybe you had a small game dealing with racism or with people with disability, to just sort of get a perspective on what are people facing, and you did this game on this 4 meter wall. And we did an evaluation after the exhibition, after we went through 56 cities, and one of the main outcomes of this evaluation was that people took a long time standing on that picture, because they really immersed themselves through those games, through this also very creative approach of this picture of a society. And we thought it would be very interesting to use this high resonance and to delve deeper into this approach of gamification and develop our own games. So that was sort of the starting point of what we do right now. And we want to delve a little bit deeper into the world of gaming, actually, and a view on why should we use games in political education. We found this nice quote by Junge: "The human being as a playing being can access the challenges of this world through the artificial challenges of the game." And I think that's something, it's a very interesting perspective and facet, thinking about, okay, maybe through games we can actually learn something for our everyday life in our real life. And that is something we should keep in our head, maybe in our mind, regarding what chances games give us. And one thing we see a trend is that the use of playful elements, game-based learning, gamification in non-game context are rising. And we see it in schools, we see it in workshops, that they've been incorporated more and more. It started with sort of first pedagogical approaches and methods, that first gamification models have been implemented, and now it's growing into a bigger facet of our work, with real games being developed. And the question is, I think, which is underlying, is which we should always ask ourselves as civic educators, is what actually makes people act and motivates them to act. And something which we think is very important is motivation and immersion. So if a pedagogical method works very well, usually the feedback is it's because it was very motivational, my voice has been heard, and I've been immersed in something. So I think games really help us to reach those points of motivation and immersion. And at the same time, we sort of have a balance we need to sort of shift around or find. It's one balance between serious games, like games which are specifically developed for educational purposes, and traditional commercial games and their use in political education, because there's been sort of this fight amongst them saying, oh no, in educational spaces we can only use those serious games. But we think as well, and we'll show you now, that also commercial games have a lot of power and can be used very well and utilized in schools, but also in workshops. And at the same time, we also have to deal with that gamification aims to create good learning environments, but we also sort of fall into the trap of nudging sometimes, which means we try to induce predetermined behavior. So that is something we have to also sort of find a balance, because obviously when we want something to do in civic education, we sort of want to raise certain competencies, lead to certain behaviors, but at the same time as we also try to do emancipatory education. So where is sort of this open space for kids, for students to find their own path? And in gaming, that is something we have to think about, is where do we let freedom happen and where do we sort of push them in a certain way? So the possibility of games are quite big. That's our opinion. And I said already, we're going to talk about also commercial games. And one thing is, I think, which most games have in common, is that games demand decisions from us. They allow us as well to take on different perspectives and to slip into different roles. So I can choose, if I'm playing a role-playing game, if I want to be this dwarf with long hair, which I'm 190 meters tall. So usually I don't see the world from that low. But at the same time, maybe I also have a relationship with other male dwarf. So it gives me a lot of opportunities. And some of the examples we put into pictures here, I don't know if some of you guys know the game Civilization. It's one of the biggest strategy games, a turn-based strategy game. So Civilization gives us the chance to actually develop our own form of a society. And I need to make constant decisions. Which form of the society, which form of law set do I want to use? Which form of religion do I want to form? So it's something very big and on a very big meta level. And suddenly I sort of feel this power this game gives me in leading a society to victory. At the same time, we have smaller games like Path Out, which sort of gives me the experience accompanying a person who's a refugee. And obviously a game will never lead to that I have the same feelings or the same emotions, but sort of I try, or it helps me to understand the perspective and certain challenges refugees face. And then the third example we came with is the game Celeste, which is this jump and run game. Looks very Mario-esque, if you know Super Mario, but Celeste slowly but surely builds up its story and actually deals with depression. And it's a super heartfelt story about how to deal with depression in a family, in a jump and run game. And this shows you the spectrum of what commercial games could do. And if we start thinking about how do we incorporate them maybe in our educational settings, it becomes very interesting, because kids students, but also adults. And this is very important because the main gaming community are actually adults, are playing those games. And maybe we can utilize them. So what are the key features of games is they often increase, if we use them in educational settings, the motivation and interest through their interactive and entertaining approaches. So just playing a game already opens up a completely different headspace with students. When we come with our cell phones into a class and say, okay, guys, you can play a computer game now, it's like, wow, oof. And it really motivates them to deal even with complex topics. At the same time, games give us the opportunity to break down those complex topics and make them tangible and grasp, and the kids are able to grasp them. And what they also help with this role change is they foster empathy and a perspective taking, which maybe of perspectives they've never taken before. The next point is as well, what we think is because you have to make constant decisions and you are facing constant challenges at games, it helps you with your own problem-solving skills and critical thinking, because you sometimes have to think about, okay, maybe this person in a game, does he really mean this? Or is he maybe trying to bluff me? So this is a very important thing, competency, or two very important competencies games can foster. And at the same time, and I think this is something which is very, very important, is games. And we have in Germany, I don't know what is the English term, but Planspiele usually leave a lasting impression. So we see in research that students often can't remember certain subject lessons or whatsoever, but if they did a game in school, they usually remember that. So we should use this chance here and work on it. So why, in the end, are games relevant for civic education is it makes diverse, complex challenges in society tangible. It helps to tell stories which maybe haven't been told before in a migration society, and helps us to fill those experiences with life. And it also, and this is very important for civic education, we meet our target audience, kids, where they are. They are in the digital space, in gaming spaces, in gaming communities. So that is something we need to also incorporate in our thinking. And in the end, it also integrates sort of the emotional components into the educational space, because games can be very emotional, and we should also use that potential.
And maybe to summarize or wrap this up a bit, what characterizes serious games? Serious games meaning games that are especially designed for not primary entertainment purpose, but for educational purpose as well. Serious games are they have this aim to educate, train, or raise awareness while still incorporating engaging and interactive game mechanics in the best sense. And key characteristics include a clear educational or behavioral objective, integration of real-world issues or content, structured learning outcomes or goals, the motivation through gameplay elements, for example, through challenges or rewards. And they are used in fields such as political or classic education, but also in healthcare, politics, or memorial work. And the question is, especially for us who are interested in anti-discriminatory educational work, what can and should games do, especially serious games? And can we, for example, address violence? What obstacles might be there? We at Kreuzberg Initiative Against Antisemitism are also engaging with classical Holocaust education. And that's why discussing the representation of the Holocaust in video games was for us kind of a starting point in our own developments. Can and should such historically and ethically charged subjects like the Holocaust be addressed in an interactive and playful format? This question touches on the core of the debate about legitimacy, limits, and the potential of serious games in memorial work and historical political education for us. For decades, World War II was portrayed in games as a depoliticized conflict, reduced to strategic or action-based scenarios devoid of historical and ideological depth. The ideology of National Socialism was largely absent, and the Holocaust was systemically ignored. A lack of awareness regarding legal frameworks combined with concerns about potential backlash prevented the game industry from exploring the memorial and educational potential of the medium. Only in recent years, you can see kind of a shift. The crimes of National Socialism are now being addressed more frequently and with greater diversity in games, but especially in the so-called serious games departments. And several initiatives and projects are either underway or are in development. That's true for Germany, but also for other, especially European countries. However, games that deal specifically and explicitly with the Holocaust remain rare. This long-standing exclusion is not without consequences. It amounted to a form of historical whitewashing that, even if unintentionally, likely contributed to a widespread ignorance about the Holocaust, particularly among young audiences. And as you might know, the knowledge on Holocaust and World War II stagnates or declines. And we also face the passing of the last Shoah survivors. Therefore, there's a need to ask ourselves, how do we want to remember in the future? And the representation of the Holocaust in video games remains, of course, a highly sensitive and a complex issue, but one that raises fundamental ethical questions about form, purpose, and responsibility. It is, from our point of view, still important to kind of address these topics and to focus on games that also connect with such serious issues. I think a notable example is the integration of a Holocaust museum into Fortnite. I don't know if you know the game Fortnite. It's one of the most popular online games worldwide, I think. And the project uses Fortnite's creative mode to build an educational interactive space dedicated to Holocaust remembrance. And in doing so, it brought the topic into a digital world where millions of young people are active, not only young people, but especially young people. And it's kind of a bridging the gap between historical education and popular culture, which is really interesting, as we think. But at the same time, it must be acknowledged that no game can ever represent all historical aspects in full. Historical and societal topics are inherently complex, and any attempt to translate them into game mechanics and narratives requires reduction and selection. This carries the danger of oversimplification or distortion. Every game design decision, whether in perspective, theme, or structure, inevitably includes some elements while excluding others. Yeah. And in the light of these challenges, we have chosen to explore alternative approaches, and we would like to give you a really small overview over our games. And I will start with our first game that we developed after the Wimmelbild. It's our analog game called Rätselräume. And Rätselräume is a German language escape room board game, so it's only available in Germany, unfortunately, and it's developed for group settings and school classes from secondary level onwards. It's a cooperative game, and it explores recent German history, especially focusing on right-wing violence through a multi-perspective, narrative-driven approach. Players uncover the stories of 5 fictional families, each of whom has experienced racism, social injustice, antisemitism, and/or hostilities as perceived others. The game actively engages with the idea of Germany as a migration society, as Fadl introduces in the beginning, and understands remembrance as a shared participatory process shaped by diverse voices and lived experiences. Among the playable narratives in the story is a Jewish family who immigrated to Germany in the early 1990s as so-called Quota refugees. The German term is Kontingentflüchtlinge. The game addresses what it means to come to the country of the perpetrators and the challenges this family, across generations from grandmother to son, faces in German society. Another story follows a family with so-called Gastarbeiter background, so guest workers background, while a third highlights the experience of a queer family with connections to both East and West Germany. These and other stories raise key historical and societal themes in the form of narrative impulses that invite players to reflect, question, and relate them to their own history and support the understanding of Germany as a diverse society, and argues for the need of a broad remembrance culture within. Rätselräume focuses more on the right-wing violence after 1945. The game works as an impulse giver. Players are encouraged to deepen their engagement with recent German history through using the accompanying booklet, which provides background information, discussion prompts, and educational materials for continued exploration. The project was conceptualized between April 2023 and May 2024 through a collaboration between us as KIgA, responsible for content and narrative design, and Playing History, responsible for game design. So as I explained in regard to Holocaust education, this connection between a group that is focused more on the gamification and a group that is more focused on the content of the game. And the first edition of 3,000 copies was sold out pretty quickly. We didn't thought that would be the case, but we were really happy. And the second edition is currently in print. As I said, it's only available in English. That's why I'm just giving a short overview about the game. And the game comes in a boxed set that includes all necessary materials, a rule book, and the educational booklet. And Rätselräume was funded by Alfred Leindecker Foundation, as is our whole project, and can be purchased free of charge within Germany. So if someone of you is from Germany, we can gladly send this game to you. I will just show it you for a second. And regarding your question, currently we are not considering a translation, unfortunately, but let's see, maybe if there's more need for that, we would be happy to do so. But I mean, the game really focuses on the German society and the German remembrance culture. So we would need to adapt it for a broader broader context. Yeah, so maybe this for the first game project we have, and Fadl will continue with our second game.
Just to add on what you said regarding the question, I think one good thing is about Rätselräume is we have a game system which can be adapted to different stories and scenarios. So in case there's any interest in doing something for your country, just get back to us, because there's something we're very interested to collaborate, to share our experience, because the system works in itself, and then we just need to find stories and a narrative regarding your own country, and that would be something very interesting, and we would be interested in doing. Yeah. So, okay, as Tabea said, we developed a second game, and it's called the Ilios Experiment. It's a digital game. It was conceptualized between January 2023 and January 2025 and got released on February the 20th in 2025. And luckily, so far, it is, for this sort of niche of games, quite successful. So we have right now over 24,000 downloads, which mainly are downloads by schools, by teachers, by multipliers, which we are very happy about, because the game is actually being used in educational and non-formal educational settings, which is quite cool. And we get more and more feedback right now in how people use it, and I will share some things with you. And it was also developed together with Playing History, and we had the same approach here, that we, Tabea and me, we were in charge of the content and narrative design, and Playing History did the game design. We have to be honest, we are not game developers. It's super complicated to develop a digital game, so we are very happy to work with experts in that regard. And as I said, it's a digital game. It's a mobile game. It's an app-based game. It's a single-player game as well, which is different than Rätselräume, where we really went the approach to have a cooperative game you can play in groups. Here I play it as a single person, but we also developed the game for a target audience of pupils, students from secondary level onwards. It works very well for adults as well, but it works for 14-year-old students very well as well. So it's a quite big range. And we also developed a digital accompanying handbook material, and it was also funded by the Leindecker Foundation. The nice thing about the Ilios Experiment is we developed it in German, but also in English. It's fully voiced in English, so it's usable outside of Germany in English-speaking countries. The game talks about tolerance as well, or the main topic is tolerance and participation in a democratic society. So the setup in this game is like this: is you as a player, you come new to the city, or you're new to the city Ilios, and you arrive in Ilios with the hope of sort of having a different experience than the place you came from, because you sort of experienced discrimination, you've been an outsider, and Ilios has the nice thing going for it that it calls itself the most tolerant city in the world, because they do sort of a project, a testing phase, where they implemented a tolerance score in their city, where they sort of have devices on their arms, and whenever they do tolerant things, they get points, and from those points they benefit. They get concert tickets, they get access to certain things. So it's a really something the city thought, and especially the mayor thought of, could help the city to be more tolerant, to be more engaging. And unfortunately, during your time in Ilios, this sort of changes, and there will be a second phase where you also get minus points for if you are deemed not to behave tolerant. So other people can sort of go to a registration place and say, okay, Tabea, now cross the road at a red light, and you get minus points for that. And those minus points lead to that you can't access certain places in the city. And so now inside the society of Ilios, there's now protest, and there's sort of resistance towards the system. And I'm in the midst of it, and I sort of have to find my own way, what I want to do now in this whole turmoil, and in the city I just arrived. And whilst I experience all this story, I also get to meet most of the people in Ilios, or a lot of people in Ilios. I form relationships. So we really try to find a city, or create a city which is really lively and tells stories. And so what we try to do here is, with the game, is to strengthen the judgment and opinion forming competency for the students and players, because they constantly are in dialogues. They have to deal with issues, they have to find solutions. So that is something which is very underlying in this game. And at the same time, it also helps to gain soft skills like communication and cooperation willingness, because I always have to sort of navigate. I have to help other people. I have to find solutions to their problems, and that really fosters those skills. At the same time, it is a very narrative game, which is driven by its storytelling, and we think that most serious games right now, they're sort of on rails, meaning I don't really have decision freedom on what is going to happen next. And that is something we tried to do in this game, is that your own decision really matter, and they sort of have an influence on how people react on you, how the ending will be, and how you go through the game. And that is something which has been very positively, because players want to be taken seriously, and have an experience where their opinion really makes a difference, actually. So the game asks two core questions. One question is, what role do tolerance and participation play for a democratic society? We think a very important role. And at the same time is, what aspects, and this is something then the multipliers and teachers together with the students have to do, is what aspects from the game can be transferred to our everyday coexistence. And if we think back to the beginning, and to the quote we had from Junge, is he said that we can always learn from games for our everyday life. That is something I think we as educators have to do in reflection sessions, in transfer sessions with the pupils after they experience the game. So our approach was really focused in this game on experiencing the city and all the challenges the city and the society is facing, and living through it, and really get a sense of, how do we actually negotiate tolerance? Is it something we decide from bottom down, or from the grassroots level up to the higher spheres? And it gives you a perspective of civil society, and a perspective meaning which certain parts are parts of a civil society, and which determine a civil society. And as we said, it's very important to make self-determined decisions, and really give them a chance, the players, to have an influence on the outcome of the game. Violence, and that's why Tabea delved into it, is actually addressed in this game in various facets, but not always visibly depicted. We work with sounds, we work with storytelling, as you also hear it in that player, but obviously violence in different forms are part of it, because we have to deal with those issues, actually. Yeah. So one thing, and I think this is the last thing before we open up to floors, because for Rätselräume and for the Ilios experiment, we developed a accompanying handbook, and the accompanying handbook, you find it online on the website for free. It's for educators and multiplayers, and the thing is that we try to do is, it's a very complex game. The game takes roughly around about 2.5 hours. If you're very quick, maybe 1.5 hours if you're a speedrunner. And what we give in those accompanying handbooks is background text to all topics, to what means tolerance, what are the underlying definitions we use, but also on how to use this game in lesson settings and in school, and how you can play it, how you can maybe piece it up into certain parts that you can play it over certain hours. We also give methods for use in non-formal and formal education settings, and we offer also workshop plans where you can incorporate the game in different lengths, a whole day, or maybe you make several days. So really try to find a package to help teachers, but also multipliers, to use this game as simple as possible. So yeah, those are our approaches regarding gaming. We think there are a lot of approaches, and we really sort of hope that we made you excited to actually try it out and try gaming in your settings, because it is fun, and it's an approach which really works for students. Yeah, thank you.